looking for, I'll start with MDP land acknowledgement. Washtenaw County occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Odawa, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, sorry. The Washtenaw County Democratic Party recognizes historic indigenous communities in Michigan and those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. Washtenaw County occupies land ceded in the 1807 Treaty of Detroit. We further recognize the ongoing relationship of, dependence upon, and respect for all living beings of earth, sky, and water. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm indigenous sovereignty, history, and experiences. What a day. Beautiful day. I'm so glad you guys are here. We're competing with a lot of stuff, and it's very, very impressive that you guys are here, starting with the weather we're competing with. We have a bunch of announcements before we get into some meat. So I want to start fast. First of all, I want to say welcome to all new people. If you've been here once or twice, wave or stand up. It's so great to see you. Thank you. We need everybody in this party. All of you old timers, say hi to the new timers, okay? And make them feel welcome. Make sure that they know we need them and value them and see them. Everybody, yeah, that's right. New timers, hold your hands up again and let people come to you and say welcome. Everybody. All right, great. Thank you. That's always good to hear. I hear good things about you. I've been wanting to talk to you, actually. That's so much better than I've been wanting to talk to you. Precinct delegates? Who's a precinct delegate? Yay! Everybody who's not a precinct delegate, say thanks to the precinct delegates. Because the precinct delegates are the boots on the ground doing all kinds of work for the party. Precinct delegates are the first level, right closest to the ground. So stuff that we want to get done goes out through the precinct delegates. Things that we need to hear comes up through the precinct delegates. So thank you, precinct delegates. If you're interested in being a precinct delegate or learning what one is, actually Janet Cannon is the co-chair of the precinct organizing committee, which really, really carries water. It is a lot of work. So if you want to learn more, write to POC, that stands for Precinct Organizing Committee, POC@washtenaw-dems.org. Janet Cannon and Josh McAllister are the two co-chairs, and they're just doing an amazing job, as you will soon hear, because there's a lot going on. Yeah, yes, of course. Walter Schrager, yes.
What is that by a specific location? I live in Saline, so I'm wondering.
Perfect.
If it's by
great
a particular area.
I bet you we need precinct delegates in Saline. So yes, so you know what, a precinct is the smallest unit of government. It's like 2,000, Janet, is it 2 or 3,000? 3,000. So like 3,000 people in a precinct. Also, we have State Senator Jeff Irwin here. Hey, Jeff. And Jeff's Chief of Staff, Annie Hall. Annie Somerville, who's also co-chair of the programs committee. So welcome to you guys. Those are the higher level. Jeff's the higher level elected. Okay. But he started as a precinct delegate. Did you start as a PD? There you go. I love that. All right. Citizens at the top, and in truth, of course, electeds serve the citizens if they want to get reelected. Anyway, so it's smallest unit of government, and it's pretty easy typically to get elected as a precinct delegate. So if you want to learn more, it's like talking to your neighbors. That's the job, and getting the democratic message to your neighbors. So POC@washtenaw-dems.org. You'll learn more. Some more announcements. We have our garden party fundraiser, our annual garden party fundraiser at the home of the previous chair, Chris Savage and Ann Savage, on July 26th. Look for that in the newsletter. There's plenty of announcement in the newsletter about that. And also, I want to say we our co-chair of communications, longtime co-chair of communications, Tom Knox, um, has said he just needs to step down. Understandably, he has been busier than one-armed paper hanger for 6 years or 7 years trying to do our comms. He has a fantastic partner now in Erica Lycan, who's mainly responsible for the newsletter. But we need like a half a dozen volunteers who love to do comms to take over Tom's to do the work that Tom has been doing by himself. So if you are interested in working on the newsletter, if you're interested in social media, weirdly, it's hard to find people who love to do social media. So if you love to do social media, if you want to, if you're really good at video production, like every month, Tom Knox has turned around the video of this meeting like overnight and posted it on the website and elsewhere. So he's not going to be able, well, he may, I don't know if he'll do it or not, but we need somebody who can do that. So spread the word. If you're not in the room who wants to do it, please spread the word among your friends and neighbors, and write to volunteer@washtenaw.dems.org. Okay, or info actually at washtenaw.dems.org. Say I'd like to do that. Okay, boy, there's so much going on. So we've had a lot of questions about why we're not doing a No Kings event on the 14th. We did a bang up job, as you know, on Hands Off. A coalition of allies, which we have to do these days is definitely be coalitions, did a really, really superb job with Hands Off. We had thousands of people come to hear, actually. And so people kind of expected that we'd do a No Kings, but we're not doing No Kings, partly because that rally was an enormous amount of work for, a number of people. And we can't do that every 6 weeks. I mean, we got other stuff to do. So that was just, I mean, it's just crazy how much work that was. And they are, but also because it's Juneteenth. The Ann Arbor NAACP is celebrating Juneteenth on Saturday the 14th. They've been planning it for a year. It's an all-day celebration starting at 10 o'clock in Fuller Park, and then walking over to Wheeler Park, and then a day of celebration. And we're not going to step on that. They've been working on it for a long, long time. And African Americans, as we know, and all people of color, are targeted by this administration and are feeling it. And we need to stand there with them. Everybody who's not a person of color needs to stand with the people of color that are our friends and allies and loves and neighbors, and we need to stand with them. So that's what we're doing on Juneteenth, on the 14th. There are a number of events in the area, from Lansing to Detroit, Jackson Road, Ann Arbor, all over the place. You can find all of them at mivoter.org. mivoter.org. All right, that is your one-stop shop for protest information, as well as information about all of your electeds and so forth, and eventually about voting. Janet, did you want to say something? Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Thank you, Marjorie, for putting that up there. So everybody pay attention to that right there. All right. Marjorie, you want to speak real quickly about what that is?
We just go every week, a whole batch of us, and stand out there with our signs and walk back and forth on the sidewalk. Tesla has actually agreed to let us have the space between the sidewalk and the road, which is technically their turf, but they don't hassle us there as long as we don't block the driveways or get too yelly or rambunctious. And we are legally allowed to be in the median, so we often go out in the median. There's a car wash there. There's a couple of those Michigan left turn things, so you can actually have people who are forced to read your sign because they're stalled, they're waiting. And people should not take their foot off the accelerator, because we've really had an impact on the Tesla
Yeah.
sales, and
It's a
Eur-
thing of
Europe
beauty,
is-
isn't it?
Yeah, Europe is helping, and my new sign will say Doge has your data.
Yeah,
so,
right.
it isn't over, and
Thanks,
they're
Marjorie.
still there.
Thanks. Okay, yeah, so Tesla takedown. Thank you for sharing that information. Yeah, you guys, so I want to talk about a couple of other things real quick. So in terms of Juneteenth, you want to sign up and help out at Juneteenth. The links are on our landing page. And they're in our newsletter. Okay, so sign up to do that. One of my favorite things to do at Juneteenth is the cakewalk. And my daughter and I love to make homemade cakes for the cakewalk, and it is stupid fun. And stupidly fun. It's not stupid. It's just so much fun. So it's a great day. So come out for that. And again, if you need information about how to volunteer, they're right to info@washtenaw.dems.org. And I'm going to stop there. Other activities today, the Black Film Festival, a2bff.org. It started last night. It goes all today, and it goes all most of tomorrow. I'm not sure exactly what the schedule is, but our good friend, oh my God, Chris Anderson, who is an African-American filmmaker and creator who has worked a lot with us on promoting mivoter.org and other projects, is the chair of the Ann Arbor Black Film Festival. So check that out, a2bff.org. Really great. He has, and in fact, on our landing page right now is a video of him on CBS News being interviewed about the film festival. Very, very cool. And also today is the African American the African American Festival in downtown Ann Arbor. So check that out as well. Again, I'm so glad you're here because of on a day like this. And just so you know, Ypsi has its own Juneteenth next week. The weekend. So the weekend like of the 21st. All right, 20th, 21st. And we'll have that stuff up on our website too. All right. And not to be missed, this Thursday, June 12th, the Precinct Organizing Committee, and I think Josh mostly organized this, Josh McAllister, the Battle of the Deadly Republican Budget. It's a panel discussion with open Q&A about what they're trying to do to us and what the local impacts will be. Representative Jason Morgan, Representative Jimmy Wilson, moderated by Precinct Delegate Leah Mills Chapman. So be there. It's and this is also on our landing page, I think. At least it's definitely on our website. 8975 Textile Road, 6 o'clock in Ypsi Township. 8975 Textile Road in Ypsi Township. It was also in the last newsletter, which comes out on Thursday. So check that out. Super important. It's co-sponsored by us and our allies at the Huron Valley Area Labor Federation. Okay, I'm going to ask Janet to come up. Debbie's going to be here in about 15 minutes. Are there any questions so far? More announcements? Anybody got anything? Feel free.
Tomorrow, in front of the federal building, a pro-immigrant rally sponsored by Washtenaw Congregational Sanctuary, 3 to 5, federal building.
Thank you, Jim. Hi, Naomi. How are you? Here's Naomi Norman as our Washtenaw Intermediate School District Superintendent. Incredible work. Thank you. Did you see also that Supreme Court said, wait, did they rule on that yet? Shadow docket. Did they already say that? No, he just went asking for an emergency ruling that he could gut the education department. That was okay. What are the odds that they'll say sure? I'm afraid the odds are really good. Come on up, Jeff. Senator Irwin.
Thank you, Teresa. I never want to miss an opportunity to talk about what we're doing in Lansing because, as I'm always trying to remind everyone, if we can pay attention to what's happening in Lansing, if we can reach out to our friends and families and frenemies across the state to share what's happening in Lansing, if folks knew what was going on in Lansing, Democrats would do much better in state legislative races. As you may know, last fall, it was a bad year for us. Republicans took back the state house. And so this whole spring, we've been trying to work with the Republicans to try to get a state budget passed. There's a state law in place that says that the state budget has to be passed by July 1st. Of course, there's no penalty for violating that law. But more importantly, the reason why that law was passed is because our local governments, and particularly our school districts, need to know what their budget is before they start their budget year. And we've got all sorts of, particularly school districts, that are getting increasingly worried about what's happening in the legislature, because if they have to start their school year without even knowing what their budget is, that's very problematic for them. And it forces them to make a bunch of choices that are not good for education in Michigan, and that are bad for education, even independent of whatever budget cuts the Republicans force on us. So that's one of the big things happening in Lansing right now. And within the context of that budget discussion, I'll try not to take up too much time, but I want to mention something that's very, very important to our community, which is higher education. Now, before, I don't need to explain why it's important to our community. I don't think I need to explain in this room why higher education is important in general, but I feel it necessary to just make a couple obvious remarks. One, higher education is our best tool for social mobility. We've always believed in trying to foster the American dream in the Democratic Party, trying to create an environment of opportunity for people to be able to be successful, to be able to grow themselves, both intellectually and economically, and higher ed is the best tool for that. The University of Michigan is the biggest tool for economic development in our state, full stop. The University of Michigan is a world beater economic development engine. And so while we're throwing money at Ford and GM and trying all these different things to bribe companies to come here, we can't forget about the most important, most successful economic development engine we have in the state of Michigan. So while all that is true, we have Republicans in the state house who are rattling their sabers, saying that higher education isn't important, and threatening to cut higher education very, very deeply. And particularly, they want to target the University of Michigan, our best, most important, most successful institution that is the biggest engine for economic development in our state. Biggest single site employer in our whole state is the University of Michigan Hospital. So that's some of what's going on in the budget front. On our side, we're trying to just move this process forward for those temporal reasons, but we're also trying to make sure we don't lose the fight on things like higher education. One more thing on the budget that you might hear publicly, and I want to arm you with some information to be able to fight back against the disinformation that the Republicans in Lansing are trying to spread. Right now, the House Speaker, and he started this on Mackinac Island last week, he started saying, we're going to come out with a great K-12 budget, and it's going to be way better than the Democrats' K-12 budget, and we're going to have a much larger per pupil allotment. And so they're throwing out different numbers, 12,000, 13,000. The number that we passed in our Senate budget was like 10,500 per pupil. And so they're trying to position that publicly and in the media as, see, Republicans care more about education than Democrats. Now, I think it's going to be pretty hard for them to get that through to the public because I don't think they have a lot of credibility on these issues, but they're going to try to use that number as something they're going to try to get you to look at to show you that, oh, look, the Democrats in the legislature aren't doing as much. And I want to tell you how they get to that number. The way they get to that number is by taking every single element of the weighted funding formula, every single what we call in education funding categoricals, and put them into the foundation allowance. And, I want school districts to have more flexibility, but the reason why we have these are things like at-risk funding, right? I don't like calling it at-risk funding, but that's what it's called in the law. But what this really is this is an attempt for us to say, look, we know it's more challenging and more costly to educate kids who are living in poverty. We know that that takes a little bit more effort. Sometimes it takes a little more support. We know it's more expensive. So we're going to say to districts that are experiencing extreme poverty, there's going to be some additional dollars coming to your district to address that need. That is a huge element of the budget, and it's a huge element of what Democrats have been fighting for, to try to get a more equitable education system, to try to get an education system that really meets the needs of all students and really starts to address those problems of generational poverty and childhood poverty and some of the challenges that our schools that are most challenged face. But the Republicans want to take all that money off the table. They want to take all that money that comes to communities like Ypsilanti and just put it into the formula and make sure that East Grand Rapids gets their portion or whatever, right? Or that Ann Arbor gets its portion. So that is a trick that they're trying to play on the public to try to indicate that they're putting more money in the budget. But if you actually look at the bottom line, they haven't passed their budget yet, but I'm confident our budget's going to have more money in it for education total but they're going to try to trick people with that per pupil number. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that. They're going to sweep in all the money for universal school lunches. They're going to sweep in all the money for kids in poverty. They're going to sweep in all the money for, transportation supports and infrastructure supports and rural and isolated district supports and everything, just to try to make their press release look good. So don't fall for that. Final thing I'll mention, no, I'll mention two more things because Teresa didn't encourage me to go short. So one is that we're trying to do two things in the Michigan Senate right now. One is we're trying to make sure that we do the important work of fighting for things that represent our values as Democrats and that are good for the state of Michigan, even if we think that the Republicans in the House aren't going to take them up. And then simultaneously, we're trying to make sure that we give light and focus to what's happening at the federal government and how some of those cuts are going to affect people here in Michigan. So in the Michigan Senate committees, we've been having a series of committee hearings focusing on Medicaid cuts, focusing on in my committee on Tuesday, we're going to be focusing on cuts to the SNAP program. And so in various Senate committees, we've been doing that. Hopefully you've seen some of the articles that we've been trying to generate and some of the media that we've been trying to generate. So once again, people understand. We need people to understand the impact of this. We need people to understand what happens to them if Medicaid gets cut. Because even if you're not someone who is on Medicaid, it's very likely that your hospital or the healthcare setting where you get your care is supported by those Medicaid dollars. And so we're trying to tell those kinds of stories in our committees. Simultaneously, we're trying to work on legislation that like I said, represents our values. So one example of that I'll give is that just this week, House Democrats and Senate Democrats joined together to reintroduce our polluter accountability package. This is the polluter pay legislation that many of us have been working on for many, many years. And we're introducing this because we need better protections for clean water in Michigan. We have the world's largest assemblage of fresh surface water. The Great Lakes are a truly special and amazing thing, but we also need it to protect our safe drinking water and to protect our land and to protect our health from the very real cancers that people get from the environmental exposures here in the state of Michigan from things like PFAS and mercury and other substances. So what we propose is upping the ante, requiring cleanups to be more clean, holding polluters more accountable, and extending the statute of limitations on emerging pollutants like PFAS. Here's the problem that some people get caught into when they maybe lived in Parchment, Michigan, and they were drinking, or they lived in Rockford, Michigan, they were drinking PFAS water from the Hush Puppies factory for many, many years. Now they know they may get kidney or liver cancer as a result of that, and their doctor is advising them to get, various tests. These people, when they either get sick or might get sick, they want to hold the company accountable and they want to sue that company for violating their health with these cancerous molecules. But what they run into is, you can't sue the company because it's past the statute of limitations, because everybody knew that this PFAS was, we've known about Teflon since the 70s, so it's past the statute of limitations. So that's one of the other things we want to do, is extend that statute of limitations to say the statute of limitations doesn't start when the chemical was introduced into the environment. The statute of limitations starts when we found out that these chemicals can harm us. And so that will give people an opportunity, people who are harmed by PFAS or other emerging chemicals, an opportunity to hold these companies accountable. So that's a number of things we're doing. I could go on and on and on about the important work we're doing in Lansing to support people in poverty, to rebuild the mental health system, to fight for clean water and clean air. But I just want to give you a taste of some of the work that we're doing in Lansing. And I also want to thank you for being here, because we can't do great work in Lansing if we don't win in elections. And that's what the Democratic Party is about. The Democratic Party is about organizing to win elections so that we can fight for these values that brought all of us here today. Why don't you call?
Cheryl. We only have a few minutes, though.
Yeah,
Yeah, I saw Devin walk in, so.
how does proposal A works with all of this? Because we went through all of that with proposal A and making sure each district had enough money to help the districts that didn't have it, so.
Yeah, so I mean, the simple answer is Proposal A doesn't work, but it's still operative. Proposal A was passed in 1994. It changes how school funding works. You know, Proposal A has kind of wet blanketed education writ large. From the standpoint of just simply an equity lens, one of the things that happened was that it took 20 years 30 years actually, but we do now have equalized state funding for schools as a result of the of what Proposal A did. And so, you know, Proposal A, like I said, it's suppressing our ability to raise revenue for education, but I don't know. There's a lot of folks who want to fix it, myself included. I think we need to rewrite it, but it's just so hard to redo the whole thing, and it's in the state constitution, so the legislature can't do it anyway.
You do.
Yep, because it's
Tom.
Zoom.
You have to because of the recording. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello, Walter Schwader speaking. My question is about getting funding for the smaller schools, not the big U of M's who have an enormous financial footprint, but the smaller schools throughout our state who may or may not need dollars assistance to put forth some educational programs that assist the students and the families living in those smaller areas.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely essential, and that's what I was talking about. You know, higher education as a tool for social mobility. I'm from Sault Ste. Marie. You know, my parents met at Lake State. I love Lake State. I love higher education. I think we need to support all these institutions. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to encourage people who know folks who are at Central or Western or up at Ferris or Northern to talk to their legislators. If you know folks who are involved in those institutions who are alumni or faculty or staff or students or anything, encourage them to talk to their legislators because these institutions are incredibly important. You know, if you're someone in the Eastern UP and you're you know, growing up without a ton of economic opportunity, that is a beacon of opportunity for you and an opportunity for you to, you know, advance your skills in a way that can be great for you and the community. So that's what, I mean, I think higher education is huge and you're absolutely right.
One more, Mike, and then I've got to let Debbie get the mic.
Thank you. Michael Cohen, proud union member of the Michigan Education Association. What's the status of those 9 bills that are held hostage from last year's session in the House?
Yeah, I thought about talking about that, but I've got too many things to talk about. So for folks who don't know what Michael's question is about, we passed a number of bills at the end of the session last year, and these bills were duly passed with a majority in both the House and the Senate. And what happens after that is that the clerks are supposed to transmit those bills to the governor. Well, what happened is, for reasons that I still don't fully understand, the clerk of the House did not transmit all of the bills. There was like 150-ish bills, and they transmitted all but 9. And those 9 bills continue to be a subject of litigation. Where it's at right now is that the Senate sued the House saying that you have to transmit these bills as indicated in Article 4, Section 33 of the Michigan Constitution. And we won at the Court of Claims. The Court of Claims judge said, yes, the clerk of the House does have to transmit these bills, but the Constitution doesn't say when. So because these bills wouldn't have gone into effect until basically like April 1st of the year, and this ruling was back in February, or maybe March, we're going to give the House Speaker and the House Clerk until that time to actually do it. Well, they didn't do it. And so then we sued them again, and now we're in the appeals court. We applied for expedited review from the Supreme Court. They unfortunately rejected that and sent it back to the appeals courts. So we're, you know, in what might be a long legal fight over this, which I think is actually kind of ridiculous because there are a lot of these bills do things. These bills matter to people. They didn't hold back just random bills. They held back the bills that had the greatest gravity to affect the lives of people here in Michigan. Let me just give you a couple examples. One, we passed a bill to reopen the pension system for corrections officers. Now, I don't know how much you know about what's going on in Michigan prisons, but one of the biggest problems in Michigan prisons that's terrible for our employees and also terrible for the folks who live there is the fact that we don't have enough COs. And as a result of not having enough COs, there's a lot of mandated overtime. So what happens is you come in for a shift, you think you're leaving in 8 hours, and you're not. You have to stay for another shift or another shift. And it causes a lot of frustration. It causes people to leave. It causes mistreatment. And so anyway, we've been trying to fix this problem by increasing the salary of corrections officers. I've been trying to encourage them to realize that, hey, look, you've got all these prisons in the UP. There's more people in Washtenaw County than in the whole UP. So no wonder you can't find employees. That's a big part of their problem. But leaving all that aside, restoring the pension would have been the single biggest thing we could have done to change that reality and also improve the lives of these thousands of COs who work for us at Saline and at Huron Valley and all over the state. And they're holding that bill up. There's another bill that would change the way that healthcare is paid for by public entities. So if you're a public employee, you're a teacher, you're a bus driver, you're a sanitation worker, you're a police officer, any of these kinds of public employees, we changed the way that their healthcare is bargained for. Cliff Notes version is that back in 2011 actually, the Republicans changed the law to basically make it so that public employees couldn't bargain for better health insurance. They couldn't bargain for the city or the school district to pay for a high percentage of their health care. They made that illegal. So we basically flipped the script on that and said, no, you have to pay for more of their health care. So what does this mean for your average teacher? I could mean $3,000 to $6,000 a year for your average teacher, depending upon what district you're in, depending upon whether you have family, all those kinds of things. And finally, the other bills that are near and dear to me, because I worked a lot on these bills. Michigan, folks don't know this, but Michigan has the worst laws in the country for people who are facing debt collection. Michigan is the worst state to be a debtor in. And what we're talking about here is we're talking about credit card debt and tenant landlord debt. Unsecured commercial debt, Michigan is the worst. We have the least protections for people. So what we did is we passed some bills that basically just said, instead of being able to take 25% of their income under garnishment, you can only take 15% of their income under garnishment. Instead of being able to take every dollar out of their bank account when you get your order, you have to leave them with a little bit of money so they can pay, maybe their half of their rent, something like that. We're required to leave them with $700 in there. So there's a whole bunch of little details like this, but essentially these bills were meant to improve our bankruptcy and garnishment laws to help people who are struggling. And this is something that we worked out and negotiated with all the bankers and the credit unions and the debt buyers. And we brought everybody along except for the lawyers who represent the creditors. and it was a good bill and it would have been good for people, and that's held up. So anyway, those 9 bills are still held up. We're still suing, and I hope that we can get a good result out of this. But the longer it delays, the more it pushes benefits away from these public employees.
Thank you, Jeff. We have a lot of, I hear a lot of criticism of the Democratic Party right now. When, some of it's justified, but I will say that we really beat the alternative by a mile. Debbie, you want to come on up? I mean, wow. We have Congresswoman Dingell here with us today. I want you to know that this woman works 24/7 to protect us and advance our values. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. And I don't mean to depress you, but as you said, there's lots of criticism of the Democratic Party, and we beat the other side. I'm going to give you a dose of reality that when you look at polling, Trump's numbers are down. Correct, whoever said that. And we're lower than Republicans. And in 2018, this is how I wasn't going to start, but you triggered me because I said something on CNN last week. And when we won the presidency, in 2018, when we had the congressional election after the 2016, we won and we got the House back because there was the Trump, and we got to get control, and we do. And I want to say that to you. And Michigan is ground zero for all of that. But right now, the numbers are not what they were in 2018. I said last week on CNN, Democrats can't just be opposed to Donald Trump. They've got to lay out what we are for. And I said we need a Project 2028. And someone else. Many people got mad at me for just saying that, but it's the truth, and I always tell the truth, as you all know. And two, someone else who thought I was good, except for one thing, but instead of Project 2028, you should have said Project Today. So I do believe that. So greetings. It's always good to be home because you guys re-energized me so I could go back and take the shit for the next week. And We passed, we didn't. I voted against it, as did every single Democrat. The Republicans passed a budget bill on the House side by one vote. I spent 4 all-nighters, just for the record. One of them was a 48-hour all-nighter. It is not the way that you should be passing legislation. And there's so much to say in so little time to do it that but I was just talking about this. I was at Dexter Forum before I came here, and the last 48-hour period of which I had no sleep, we began the day on Tuesday. The Republicans brought the Rules Committee in at 1 a.m. on Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. I was there all night and testified around 7 or 8 in the morning, 8 o'clock, I guess, in the morning. They were in all day. At 11 p.m. on Wednesday night, they brought the bill, the substitute bill that we would be asked to vote on. And I don't care who you are. I think you should study bills. You should know what's in them. You cannot study an 1,100-page bill when it's brought in at 11 p.m. at night. They passed the rules, brought it to the House floor at 1 a.m., and we voted on it at 7 a.m. So we're now still finding all kinds of, like, nobody knew that in that bill it limited a judge's ability to hold people contempt in court. I did know, many people didn't know because I offered the amendment to keep this from happening, was that it limits the state's ability to pass regulations on AI for a decade. And we could, in one of the 24-hour we were in for 31 hours, but that was the Energy and Commerce Committee hearing. Among the amendments that I offered was one that would say that in the U.S. you would not pay any more for a pharmaceutical drug than any other country does in the world, which, by the way, Donald Trump is for. So I took his and made it into an amendment. And of course, every Republican voted against it. And then I was doing way too early the next morning. And they show a clip of Donald. They didn't know it. They thought it was in it. Even way too early did till I said this. Donald Trump doing a press conference the night before, after the bill had passed, and saying, and this bill will lower prescription drugs. You won't have to pay any more than another country. And I went, that's not true. I'm the one that offered the amendment in committee and in the Rules Committee, and Republicans voted against it, every single one of them. So it's not in the bill. They don't even know what's in the bill. There's so much we need to be doing and we need to be talking about. Obviously, the budget's going to be the major focus. The bill that was passed by the House is the largest cut in food assistance in the history of this country. What it does to Medicaid. The governor and I have been working Medicaid for 2 months. We're going to do a week of action on the week of June 16th because hospitals are going to close because of this bill. And by the way, it also adds to the deficit because $2.4 trillion to the deficit because we're giving billionaires tax cuts. So I have no idea what's going to happen to this bill because, I mean, you can't help but love Elon Musk on Thursday, though I don't love him and will never trust him. But it was entertaining to watch but even that, I want to say something. If you're from Michigan, I said this in our leadership meeting Friday, because I'm always but there's this, when you talk about tariffs, everybody wants everybody to be opposed to tariffs, but if you're in the auto industry and you're competing with China, tariffs can be a tool in the toolbox. And Elon Musk's total meltdown, and we probably agree with most of what he said, is going to really hurt the auto industry because we don't stand a chance on the EV tax credit now. We've been trying to get the autonomous vehicle framework done for, anything that's auto related that actually would help our union workers, would help our state, is also going to be totally screwed because of Elon Musk and Donald Trump. So you got to look at everything and take it. Nothing's simple. On the Senate side, Josh Hawley, one of the most conservative senators in the Senate, called the Medicaid portion of this bill immoral. You've got senators all over the place. You've got the Ron Johnsons and Rand Paul will be like Tom Nassie, no matter what, will vote against this bill. They don't have the votes for this bill in the Senate. The bird bath, which is the way you vote for this bill, it can't be filibustered, but you gotta, what's in the bill has to meet, the parliamentarian on the Senate side has to rule that things are in order, and a lot of the bad stuff could maybe come out of the bill. But since senators have been ignoring the parliamentarians, I mean, one example is there was what's called a CRA where they repeal actions by the Biden administration, and there was one on California banning the internal combustion engines that the parliamentarian and the GAO office said was not in order. And John Thune said he was always going to listen to the parliamentarian, but they didn't. So I and Haley Stevens did vote against it on the House side. To be really clear, I did it based on, I don't want to set a parliamentary precedent so that they could do the same thing on Medicaid to people or people that could really pay the consequence. I don't think we should be banning the internal combustion engine right now, but I think EVs, we need to make EVs in this country. I think the global marketplace wants it and the environment's real. The Senate voted on it. I mean, it was repealed. Alyssa Slotkin was the only Democrat that voted with Republicans on it. I'll say that to you. And I am worried about precedent setting. It's kind of crazy, I guess, in Washington right now is the best way I can say it. So I never thought I would pray for the United States Senate to fix or to make sure something bad that was passed in the House. You never really think you can count on the Senate, but right now, let's just hope that total dysfunction kills this bill. But Donald Trump is pushing really hard and they know how to push levers. And that's why I want to say to everybody, we the people matters. When you've seen democracies fall apart, where you have seen the Hitlers rise, where you have seen dictators and kings, is when the people stop speaking up and speaking out. And I know people get frustrated and wonder, what difference do you make? And you make a difference. And we can't stop. And Washtenaw County is one of the engines that keeps people going, keeps people speaking up and speaking out. And that's what we got to keep doing. There's just, next Saturday is, there are, what are we calling it officially? No King Day. I mean, it is a fucking outrage what that man is going to do in Washington, D.C. next week with the military parade. And I hope people will show up at these No King rallies. There are about 4 or 5 of them just in Washtenaw County. And I'm going to go to, I'm telling everyone right now, I'll be at all of them, but the Ann Arbor one, because Zach, my district director is getting married in Grand Rapids at 5:30. And if I don't go, you might be going to my funeral. So I'll be at everything but that. But we got to keep speaking up and speaking out. So I could keep talking because there's so much, but I can see their questions. And
So, yeah, thank you. I told you 24/7. So Debbie, on the CRA, is it a good strategy for us to ask our senators to weaponize the CRA to stop this bill? Is that a good strategy? Common Dreams put this out as a strategy last week or a few days ago. Janet, you want to speak to it real quickly? Because we're thinking congressional, yeah.
Okay.
CRA.
Okay, so the idea is that if we can't really count on the already dysfunction of the Senate, that our senators could help it along by creating a sort of a mini filibuster situation based on that illegal or irregular vote to disapprove California's waiver for the vehicles. They have set a precedent that you can put up a CRA, meaning a resolution of disapproval of a previous action, right? And this if this is a precedent, it opens up a lot more actions that they could just routinely put up a bunch of resolutions, one after another, that would take 10 hours of debate and the voting time, and then they put up the next one, and they don't expect to win them, but they're going to completely, as we're saying, that tactic of throwing sticks into the wheels. That's the basic idea. What do you think?
I need to study it more because there wasn't any kind of stopping this last one in the Senate. So it passed and a Democrat voted with it. So it sets very dangerous precedent. What I'm really worried about, I'm not happy on the California thing, and I think we got to bring all the stakeholders together on autos. But there are issues that really matter not that this doesn't matter. So I got to be careful. But when you're talking about Medicaid and Medicare and what people, the programs that make the difference in whether people can live or die or a child is hungry, if the parliamentarian says this action isn't in order, you should, and the government accounting office, you should be respecting that. So I gave a floor speech that said, hey, we shouldn't ban the internal combustion engine. We should have a mixture of all vehicles, but let's bring all the stakeholders to the table. But I won't vote for this because of the precedent it sets. So if you cause trouble, if you're a pain in the ass, that makes it clear you'll be a pain on the ass on everything that happens. So there should have been more pain on the asses on that there, and the Senate has more parliamentary tools to be pain in the asses. Although we did the Rules Committee that you watched on the budget, we kept them there for 24 hours. We more than 100 House members spoke during the Rules Committee and brought attention to issues the American people needed to know. That's how we can do it on the House side, and I support people doing it on the Senate side.
Okay, that's great. Okay. Who?
Hi,
But we got to be quick.
Debbie, I'm from New Jersey. I don't mince words. I canvass for George McGovern.
Is it at?
I'm from New Jersey. I've canvassed for George McGovern. I'll leave this party if we don't win in 2026. So I strongly encourage you to ask the Democratic Party to come out with a project 2026 so that when we go door to door.
Here's your good news. I'm fucking working on it for the House of Representatives. We're going to put the values out by August 8th before we leave in the House. And I got everybody after me, but I'm telling Akeem and everybody, so you don't have to tell me. I'm already on it, and I've said it on national television.
But I'm talking about nationwide, the brand. When we go door to door, we could tell them this is what we stand for.
Because totally got it. Said it on CNN last week.
Thank you. We can't afford to lose this.
Yes, of course. No, thank you. No.
Debbie, I had the opportunity to work with local clerk on ballot mailing, AV mail-in ballots, and the first thing they told me was how hard you worked to get the mail system working. First thing out of the mouth.
We just have to keep working, guys. You can't give up. I know people are discouraged. You can't be discouraged. If we keep it up, we, the people, will win. Go back to other points in history. People got down. You can't get down. You keep working.
Thank you, Debbie. Any other questions? Oh, I wondered about your orange vision in orange. Thank you. Gun Violence Prevention Day. Are we good for Debbie? All right, big round of applause. So that sounded like a yes on the CRA action to me. So I think we should, anything we can do, exactly. We're in a threat of like a big systems collapse. So we need to use systematic means to stop them wherever we can. And something Debbie didn't mention, but that horrifies me, is that this immoral bill includes tens of billions of dollars to build private prisons and strategies for removing Black and brown citizens from this country, immigrants from this country, even if they're legal. So that, I mean, people don't even talk about that piece. There's so much horror in this bill. It's just unbelievable. So, oh my God. Anyway, Annie, Of all the titles I already have, mentioned of Annie, she's also a member of the County Board of Commissioners. And you know what, Annie, if you'd also speak to the budget you guys well, sorry, that was the city council. Never mind. You have that. Awesome. So Annie Somerville, another tireless public servant.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? So speaking of systems collapsing, I was asked to talk a little bit about what the county and Ann Arbor City just recently did to help support food gatherers while they've lost a lot of cuts. And so despite the 500,000 that the county allocated for them through the senior millage for older adult food pantries, and the city of Ann Arbor just allocated 300,000 to them, they still have a lot of gaps. A lot of their summer food programs that they do at the libraries aren't happening this year because of the USDA cuts. And so I'll take this moment to ask you if you have, if you're getting a lot of emails from candidates across the country asking to donate to them, I would encourage you to donate directly to food gatherers because they work across the county in food pantries at every corner of our communities. And I want to thank Ann Arbor City. They did some things in their budget to help kind of fill gaps that are going to impact and help the whole county. They approved some funding, 300,000 for substance use treatment, 160 to help with eviction prevention, 140,000 to help with the Shelter Association, and then 100,000 to go to CAN, which is a youth serving agency. And even though you might think that might not be helpful because some of this will be focusing in Ann Arbor, it actually takes a load off the whole system. And so those organizations that are filling gaps will actually have more room. So it's really good for Ypsi actually when Ann Arbor invests more in those services because it ensures that we still have more support to do work on the east side. And so I'm grateful for the steps that the city council in Ann Arbor has taken. And we know that in Ypsi we have a lot higher need. And so I'm going to continue to ask people to support food gatherers and the Shelter Association and Alpha House. We are just anticipating major hits to the just human health and human services broadly. And my goal and priorities are going to be to keep people housed and fed. And we're going to have to work with our partners across the board to do that. But small donations that go directly to those organizations go a long way. Kathy, you're whispering something. Yes. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think even small and big ways, getting involved, especially with nutrition, are helpful. It's just the gap in the summer food program that normally is run through a lot of our libraries is going to be a major hit to kids who typically count on those meals when they're not in school. Sometimes the only meals they get are when they're at a summer camp or at a library program. And so my plea to you all is to support the organizations that do that work. And when you help food gatherers, you're actually helping a lot of the other food related organizations throughout the county because they all have partnerships with food gatherers. So I am kind of singling them out because they're kind of the hub for nutrition access in the county. And then the other thing, we're still working through budget items for the older adults millage to get more money out, but we just approved funding on first reading at our meeting this week to get money out the door this summer to senior centers across the county. And then the next process will be that senior centers throughout the county can apply for more funding on top of the baseline funding that we're giving to help fill gaps in older adult services. And so if you haven't tuned in to our recent Board of Commissioners meeting. It's long, but we talked a lot about the older person's millage. And so we still have a second reading. And if you have any feedback, we're happy to take it. But our goal is to get dollars out the door this summer, not only to senior centers, but also to help expand senior transportation, nutrition, and other health related gaps. We might be filling in gaps for healthcare loss that we're anticipating. And so feel free to give feedback, but we're trying to fill in the gaps that we're expecting. Thank you.
Thanks, Annie. I want to mention a couple things. So it's foodgatherers.org, foodgatherers.org. you can go to easily. I just want to mention Chris Watson, who is the vice chair of the party, is also a member of the Ann Arbor City Council, who was instrumental in passing that very, very helpful budget. And I also want to say Dana Green, who is a member of the Township Board. Welcome.
Superior.
Superior Township Board. If you want to say anything, come on up. And Janet Cannon, chair of the precinct organizing committee. You got something else?
Yep, we have Larisha and Debbie from Ypsi Township. Yep. Yeah.
Just walked in. Stand up, say hi. Hi, Larisha. Hi, Debbie. Hi. Good to see you. Okay. Janet has, again, precinct organizing committee, one little more bit.
Yeah. So if we go forward with the campaign to the senators about that idea, we'll let you know. And that's the big question. How do we let people know about things that are not regular newsletter items? And something precinct organizing has been working on is creating a network of signal groups. Well, actually, for the moment, we're creating a Washtenaw County signal group for those who want to be quickly notified and want to be able to get back to us quickly. Okay. Currently, our committee, our precinct delegates and our area captains are sending regular information about actions and about need for responding to bills, about what's going on politically every now and then to our whole network of volunteers. So that's an email with a lot of details. So that's two ways to help us keep you informed regularly and updated. So if you are interested in being either on our email list in your geographical area or in a general signal group, that would be quick notice and also a quick way to get back to us. I think the best thing, unfortunately, we didn't come prepared with QR codes and signups, but just talk to me afterwards. I'll be here afterwards. I'll make a list of people who want to be added to either of those lists. Okay.
Or if you miss Janet, write to info@Washtenaw Dems or POC@Washtenaw Dems.
One last thing. So the town hall that Teresa mentioned earlier for Ypsi Township is part of the POC's effort to enlarge the way that we're working and to be more, I would say, more inclusive, because a lot of times what we do best is based on neighborhoods like in Ann Arbor, our voter guide, things like that. We're really looking for ways to reach out more into communities. And so I'd like to just add to that upcoming town halls also organized by Cheryl Deppner, who's a precinct delegate in Superior Township. And those will also be in the newsletter and available the 20th and the 27th at Moonwings Cafe. You'll be hearing about them.
Thanks. There's so much going on. And I was just, as Janet was talking, I was wondering if we can, I'm going to talk to our astounding tech team to see if we could use mivoter.org as an outlet for specific information about the local organizing that WCDP is doing. I think we might be able to do that. Yeah. So that'd be helpful. In the meantime, mivoter.org for all of the protests that are going on everywhere. I think that's it for announcements, unless do we have any comments or questions or requests from the room? Eli, I know you don't have a comment or question. Eli is the other co-chair of the program committee. I do want to mention, because I probably won't have an opportunity again, today, Ann Arbor Black Film Festival, a2bff.org, and the Ann Arbor African American Festival. And next week, a week from today, Juneteenth, we need homemade cakes. And join us at 10 o'clock on at Fuller Park to march to the other park. We're meeting at Fuller Park and we march to Wheeler Park. All right. And super important day. All right. I think that's it for now. Here we go with the formal program.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I'd like to ask the panelists for the program on responding to absenteeism in Washtenaw County Schools to please move up to the front row. And I want to thank them. All the panelists have other responsibilities, very busy in the work of educating students So I want to thank them for taking the time to join us today for this discussion. I have asked the panelists to introduce themselves briefly, so 1 minute, to respond to a number of questions that I sent them, and then to respond to your questions. So that's going to be the theory of the panel. I have I'm going to go in order of starting with the school, the teachers in elementary schools. So Tamala Bell and Debbie Swanson both teach in elementary schools. Alena Zachery-Ross is the superintendent of the Ypsilanti Community Schools, and Naomi Norman is the superintendent of the Washtenaw Intermediate District. So that's going to be the order of the discussion. And without further ado, I will ask the panel to begin. Ms. Bell, would you please start? Use the microphone so that viewers on Zoom can watch you as well.
Is this on? All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tamala Bell, and I am a 4th grade teacher at Thurston Elementary. I teach math, science, and social studies, but I am a half-time teacher because the other half of my day, I am the vice president of the Arbor Education Association. Thank you. I am going into my 21st year as a teacher in Ann Arbor Public Schools, and overall, this will be my 24th year in public education, And I am pretty much a lifelong resident of Ann Arbor. My father came here after the Vietnam War to work for Ford when I was 3 years old, and my family never left. My mom loved it here, and we never left and went back down south. So I am a proud product of Ann Arbor Public Schools. I started at King Elementary in kindergarten, and then I moved over in third grade to Logan Elementary when that school was built. Then went to Clegg Middle School, and a proud River Rat graduate of Huron High School. I went on to Grambling State University for 3 years, and then I returned home and completed my education at the University of Michigan, and go blue, and began my career as a police officer in Ann Arbor before switching because of a medical issue, switching and falling in love with education. I took a job as a parapro at my daughter's school, loved it, returned to school to get my teaching certification, and I now have been teaching for 23 years. So thank you. It's always a joy. It's always an honor to be included on the panel. And this is something that directly impacts us as teachers and that I see all the time. I will talk in a little bit about stories with students that I have had and the impact that absenteeism has on our students, particularly our Black and Brown students. So thank you for the opportunity to participate.
Good morning. My name is Debbie Swanson, and I have just finished my 40th year teaching in the Ypsilanti area. I started right out. I know it's a big endeavor. It doesn't seem like it. 40 years it passed pretty quickly, but most of my career was in Willow Run Community Schools and Ypsilanti Community Schools. So I've lived in Ypsilanti Township my whole life. And those 2 school districts are where I spent my time. About half my time was spent in the upper elementary, so that would be grades 3 through 5. And then I spent about the other half of my time in middle school, 6 through 8. And so when I think about my career, I tend to gravitate towards newer things. So like if they were going to start a new school or if they were going to start something, I tend to gravitate towards that. So some of the highlights for my career was I started at Kaiser, which is in West Willow. It's no longer a school, but that's kind of where I got not only my experience with like the families in the neighborhood school, but just like my own growth as a teacher, being surrounded by other people who could mentor me and take care of me. I was kind of the new kid on the block at a time when they weren't hiring a lot of teachers. And so I was very fortunate to be surrounded by mentors who could help me. And one of the biggest ways they mentored me was how, they can teach you a lot of things, but how you interact with families and how you make connections with parents. I learned a lot at Kaiser about that. And of course, being in a neighborhood school, that made a really big difference. So you'll notice themes when I'm talking community and just the importance of neighborhoods. So, and when we think about attendance and I think about schools and the way schools have changed, one of the things that I think we really lost in some areas is this ability to have neighborhood schools. And there are reasons for that. And in the beginning of the career, when that started to happen, often it's dismantled because of financial reasons, because school districts just have to do that and the impact of that. But sometimes now, as I look at the end of my career, 40 years, and I look back, there are things we talk about now that nobody talked about when it was happening back then. So why were certain schools the ones that were picked to be closed? I think it was financial, but I think there were other things at play that we are more likely to talk about now that we didn't talk about then. We didn't say we were closing that school because it's in a neighborhood where there are people with higher needs. We didn't talk about that then. So that part is important to me. And then, so Cheney Academy of Math and Science is another time when they said, we're going to do something different. We're going to open up this magnet, gravitated towards that. And that was a multi-age program with grades 3 through 5, where I was able to work with students for 3 years. And amazing things happened there. When you can work with families and you can have an impact over time, you can really compensate for a lot of things that you can't do in a school year. The new middle school. So when Willow Run opened up a new middle school, gravitated towards that. Taught in 6th grade, and in that environment, we were in houses. So students would enter the middle school, and they would be in one of the 4 houses. I was teaching 6th grade, and then there was a 7th and 8th grade team with me, and so students would stay that whole 3 years within a block with teachers. Again, community made a really big difference. And then when Ypsilanti Community Schools opened up, I was at the middle school. I was a team leader for what was called the AC Tech Middle School. Again, small learning community, not so small. There were like 300 students. But when you have a group of people working together, you become a family and it matters. And then, so that I can pass on that part. But there's other things that were really important to me, but I just think that those things in particular, I always wanted to be a part of something because naturally I wanted to be part of community because community is so important. So now I will pass it to my superintendent, my former superintendent, Dr. Zachery-Ross.
And I love this woman here. She, as you can hear from her passion, she has really poured her life into this work, and I'm just happy to have been a part of it. I'm Alena Zachery-Ross, proud superintendent of Ypsilanti Community Schools. I've served as a superintendent for 13 years, and in this state, that's a rare, well, across the nation, that's a rare thing, especially being an African American and a woman, and that just makes me proud, and is an important part of this conversation. I've been a educator now for over 30 years. I'm starting from teacher in Detroit Public Schools, all the way through the ranks, mostly in the area of special education. Started as a special education teacher, through all the way through the first African American educator in Warren schools, in the Warren Van Dyke School District. First principal there that was an African American, elementary principal, middle school principal in that district, and assistant superintendent. And I lived here in the preserves, right here in this area. And then I was the superintendent in, where was I? Muskegon Heights, Muskegon Heights, Okemos, and then I was able to serve here for the last 7 years. So just proud educator for over 30 years, and I've just really enjoyed my experience here in Ypsilanti Community Schools.
So I'm Naomi Norman. I have lived here in Washtenaw County for 40 years and have taught, moved into administration when I was relatively young, and was always about innovating. I think that was one of my themes, and innovating in a way that serves all kids. It's really important as someone who grew up in poverty myself, understanding those dynamics, and that as a kid, we can't control that. but the adults around us can create opportunities for us. So I deeply understand how important that is and have brought that to my career. I've had a number of different administrative roles, but the ones that will help me today for this conversation, I was the assessment coordinator for Washtenaw County at the ISD earlier in my career, which means I worked with all the different data systems. And so data is a space, I love to talk about numbers, so we'll get into that in a bit. I also was director of instruction, which allowed me to work with Debbie on some of these really cool projects and do a number of things that not only instructionally, one of our big projects around adolescent literacy, we were the 15th highest performing in Michigan, and we went to the top performing county in the state with our work in about 15 years ago. So that was a really big deal. So I'm always looking at systems and how they would work. And then more recently, since the pandemic, I've been in the superintendent role, and I see the really important role of the community in terms of what happens in our schools. So I'm starting to understand that dynamic much better.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask a few questions before I open up the panel to questions from the floor. And again, starting with Ms. Bell, what are the dimensions of absenteeism in your classroom, in your school? How is, and for those further down the row, in the district in Washtenaw County, how has the incidence and severity of absenteeism changed over the past 5 years? What percentage of students miss a very large number of classes, say a quarter or a third or more? So the absentee statistics that are published by the state under a national law record how many the absenteeism for students who are absent for 10% of the school days. But in many ways, that's only the tip of the iceberg. It's what of the students who are absent a third of the time, half the time? So that's, I want to focus on those two especially. So take the question where you want, Ms. Bell.
Thank you so much for the question, the opportunity to speak on this. My school year will end on Wednesday, and we were talking about data. As I was looking at completing report cards and looking at the data of my students, I have a very diverse class this year, and I have 8 different languages spoken in my classroom. And as I take a look at what my data says about absenteeism, I have probably about 10% of my class that have missed 25% of the school year with absences. So I have one student in particular, and when we talk about absenteeism, I think one of the things that we have to get to is the root cause and the systemic reasons of why students are absent. And I'm glad that you mentioned the pandemic, because especially since COVID, I have seen this shift. Now, we've always had students that were absent for whatever reason. And to be clear, I'm not talking about the students that spend an extended time in Disney or their family decides to go to Europe. I had a student whose family decided to spend some extended time after the Olympics in Europe. I'm not talking about those families. I'm talking about the students one of my students whose mom was denied a visa to join her family, and the mom is not here. And when this student attends, which is rare, her mind is not on school. That is not what she's thinking about. And I think that we need to look at the systemic causes of what's happening. Now, I have seen this change over the course, and I hope to have a 40-year career in education. But over the time that I've been here, I've seen the changes with students, with the reasons why students are absent. And I think that previously we used to have sort of this culture of family blaming, where we would blame the family if students didn't complete their homework. Well, why aren't they working with their children? We have this very westernized view of what helping a child, what loving a child looks like. And many families, what they do is they get their children up in the morning and they send them to school and they entrust them in our care in order to make sure that they're okay and they're learning. And so as I was looking at my data for these students in particular, because one of the things that we have to show is the growth of students over time. We have to be able to demonstrate that a student has grown from the fall until the spring in subject areas, or from spring to spring for subject areas. And when I looked, and these two students that I have missed over 25% of the school year with absences. And unexplained absences, absences that we have not heard from the families that there's an illness or there's a particular reason. Now, when I was very early in my career, what I used to do were home visits, because when we talk about neighborhood schools and we talk about community and sort of those wraparound things that we can do to support families and students. And I remember a student in particular going to his home and his mom slamming the door in my face. "What are you doing here?" And then she slammed the door in my face. And I said, we're going on a field trip, and I just would like for you to sign, because I would really love for your child to be able to go on this field trip with us. She opened the door, she signed it, she slammed the door again. By the end of the school year, because I had made so many unannounced visits, that student was then dragging his mom to school and saying, "I have to get up, I have to go to school." But we don't have the financial resources to make sure that we support kids with the wraparound services that are so needed. We have so many social work positions that are never, ever filled. They go unfilled, even though they are, posted. We are losing our intervention specialists in Ann Arbor Public Schools because of budget cuts. And so we don't always have those wraparound services to help students and to understand and get to the root causes. And it directly impacts performance in school, because kids that are missing 25% of the school year, kids whose moms were denied visas and aren't here with the family, those kids are not thinking, how can I make up the work on long division that we did in math yesterday? They're thinking about other things, and it directly impacts their performance in school. So I know that in my class each year, I typically have about 10% of my students that have absenteeism that's upwards of closer to 25%.
Thank you. Ms. Swanson, could you speak also directly into the mic?
Yep,
like this?
sure. So, I would say the absenteeism has increased in the past 5 years, and it seems more widespread. So it used to be maybe you'd have a couple students you need to focus in on with attendance, and now it seems to be many, many students with significant numbers, even though some may be more than others. There are a lot of absences across the board. And I'd say about a third of my class this year had significant absence. So everybody was absent, but probably I'd say about a third had what I would call more significant. And I think COVID had an impact, but I also believe that there were things that were at play before COVID that maybe we didn't know were escalating or where they were under the surface, and then COVID just knocked that out. And so not knowing some of those things that were at play, it's hard, because everybody I think thinks it was COVID, but I think it's more than that. I think COVID just really eliminated the system we had in place. And then I also think there's like systems, it's a big deal. There's a lot of systems that when you start to chip away at things, mostly because of budget and financial things, there are things that are supposed to catch things that just don't happen. So like enrollment is one of those things, like is because I can look from the beginning of 40 years to the end of 40 years. And I know that people sometimes don't want it back looking that things were better, but there were some systems in place that just helped. Like if you had to enroll, there were certain things that you had to have in place. And so there were checkpoints. And then if you left, there was a real persistence to figure out where people were. Like if you weren't coming to school and you were gone for about 2 weeks, where were you? And if your family was saying you're at another school, then we were either getting record requests, like there was a very short period of time to take your child and get somewhere else. And if that wasn't happening, somebody was kind of asking and looking, not in a punitive way, but making sure that children were accounted for somewhere. And that it just doesn't, it's there, but it's not as persistent because there's so many other things going. Like I've had students disappear for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and I'm like, where are they? They're going to another school. Have we confirmed that? It gets even particularly hard if somebody says, well, I'm taking them to New York to be with an aunt or something. I really want to know that if they're not with me in the school that we're at, that some other school is now looking for that child. And I think part of that happened when there was an incident in Detroit where a young person was murdered and nobody knew that she was in a freezer somewhere for years. And me as a teacher thought, how did that happen? I mean, how was someone not looking for her in that system of she's not showing up? Somebody could have said she was somewhere else. And that's a really extreme case, but it didn't make sense to me. And that's because those systems of being accountable for children are weakened, I should say. I don't want to say they're not in place. And then there's only so many times a secretary can call and say, where are they? And then call that other school because everybody's really busy in school doing their other jobs. You could have a stack of people you're trying to check on. And so that part I think is just not there. It's weakened, I should say. And then I'm so glad, I love the part that when you were talking about like going to someone's house, because in a neighborhood school, like we would just go walk down the street and knock on doors. Usually got a little better reception. It was usually mama in her nightgown saying, what? Get to school. You told me you weren't supposed to be there. But those relationships really matter.
Right. Well, YCS has, out of our 4,000 students, 60 students have that 50% of attendance. When you ask specifically, we have a data person and they said 60 of our students had the 50%, were literally at that chronic absenteeism. And that's a real challenge because our teachers are needing to continue to go on as they looked at, as both of the teachers talk about. They have to continue on with teaching and instruction. It really gives them, when they continue to come into school and they go back, they try to go and catch the students up. At the end of the year, they're accountable for ensuring that with the NWEA MAP testing, they're looking at their own evaluation. They're talking to the parents about their growth. They're talking to their administrators about their own growth plans, and they're having these conversations. And so with that assessment conversation, and when they're talking about those growth plans, that's a concern. And so these students impact the achievement scores, they're impacting their own conversations about, do they move on? What are they going to do about their own learning plans? And then we also have a number of students with 20 or more days. So it's not, those gaps that they're talking about is a problem. And what the problem is ranges. We do an effort to conduct those daily home visits. We have 3 community liaisons, so the teachers aren't going necessarily every day to the homes, but we have 3 community liaisons that are assigned to the different buildings. They have, so that if they are going to once they getting close to 10 days, those 3 community liaisons are connected and they partner. They meet twice per month to strategize as a group. They meet with the ISD staff, they meet with the county staff, and they meet with the assistant superintendent to think like, okay, what are our overall attendance strategies? But they are meeting daily with the building saying, okay, here are these people, who do we go knock on their doors? We also have partnered with Concentric because three community liaisons can't go visit and knock on the doors. So those people are the people who additionally go and help conduct house visits, and they have an app so that when they're at the house, they report back and say either nobody's at the house, they've moved. We have right now 164 unhoused families, and that's a lot. 164 unhoused families in YCS alone. And so we're either doing hotels, they're partnering together with them. We have them, there's so many together. We're just trying to figure out what to do. And right now we were out of school as of yesterday, and that was our biggest fear. You talk about food gatherers. We think about what can we do to make sure. We have over 1,200 students right now getting ready to go to Grizzly Learning Camp, because we know we have to do something all summer long to make sure that we are feeding, that we have school happening, that we have to do something in our district, because we know this chronic absenteeism is because we've got a lot of people that even at home, when we found out what the data said, they're at home taking care of babies. When they're at home, they're not walking around. You're not driving around and you see children walking around at the store and lounging around. They're at home taking care of children because their parents working. And so this chronic absenteeism, as Ms. Swanson said, is a problem for multiple reasons. And after the pandemic, it did become, people just started staying home. They were at home and they just started staying home even more. And so we understand that as a culture, you started seeing us have signs up saying school all day, every day. And it seems like that just makes sense, but it doesn't make sense for everyone. And so as a culture, this conversation is necessary.
Oh, sorry. You know, there'll be a chance for questions later. I'd first like to go. Ms. Norman?
I'm going to focus on the Washtenaw County numbers to help you understand from a big picture where we stand. All of this data that I'm going to be using today is available publicly at the myschooldata.org website, so you can go and look up yourself. So for last year, which is the most recent year we have data, the number was 89.81% of all students. So that was the attendance rate for all students. So what does that mean? You see a number like 89.1% is an average attendance rate. A typical school year is 180 days. So if you have an average attendance rate of 89.81, that means on average across Washtenaw County, students were attending 162 days a year out of 180. So we have an average absenteeism rate of about 18 days per student per year on average, all kids for last year. If I look back to 2015-16, Washtenaw County's average rate was 95.48, which is significantly higher. On average back then, kids were missing about 8 days a year in Washtenaw County. So we've more than doubled. That's the first really important point. Now, if we look at chronically absent kids, so these are kids who missed 18 days or more, 10% of the year, 18 days or more. The chronically absent group had an average attendance across all of them of 76.7%. That means on average, they attended 138 days out of the 180. That's the equivalent of 42 days absent. If you think about someone missing 42 days of school, and this is an average, if you think of someone missing 42 days of school, and you multiply that, let's say 12 years of schooling, that's 504 days of missed school, which is the equivalent of 2.8 years of school. I put it in those terms because I want you to understand that missing 10 or 18 days a year, it might not seem like a lot, but when you add it up, or 20 days a year or 30 days a year, that's like 2 days a month, 3 days a month. When you add it up, it means you're missing a tremendous amount of instruction. And it's not a surprise then when we see a correlation between attendance and how kids are performing in school. There's a very close correspondence. One more important point about this data. If I look back to 2015-16 in our chronically absent group, their rate of absence was up at 82.5%, a lot closer to what we're seeing all kids right now. And I say that to just explain that we literally are in a crisis in Washtenaw County, and I think Michigan, probably the country, but for sure in Washtenaw County. So this year, that chronically absent group of kids, how big do you think that group is? I'm gonna let you know, back in 2015-16, it was 10.5% of all students, and in Washtenaw County, that was 4,900 students. That was in 2015-16. Last year, it was 31% of our students, 13,700 students were chronically absent in that bucket of missing on average 42 days in a school year. So I want you to understand that we've tripled the number of kids that are chronically absent in the last 8 to 10 years.
Okay, we'll have a chance for introductions later, promise.
I'm going to leave it at that.
All right, I have a series of questions, very methodical, but the panel's been answering them already. So I'd like to just jump to this question of what further resources schools need from whatever source to respond to this challenge. So Ms. Bell mentioned the role played by social workers, or maybe it was Ms. Swanson.
Behavior interventions.
So what resources do school needs and what methods should schools use more of, or perhaps new entirely, to respond to this challenge as concretely as possible?
My first thought is money, 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 money. We need money. We need our schools to be funded properly. We need for our leaders to stop raiding our school funds in order to pad their pockets. And it starts with funding and it starts with people, because when we talk about having 3 community liaisons for a district the size of the Ypsi school district, that's not enough. Now, when I first started teaching in Ann Arbor, we used to have truancy officers. I don't know if that's a thing anymore, but it used to be that when students were chronically absent, as we talk about where are the students, tracking why they're not coming to school, we no longer have that position in Ann Arbor. And so when we talk about what specifically do we need to do, one, we need the funding to be able to hire people that are able to do and provide these wraparound services that are so critical for our students with the chronic absenteeism. It begins with, why are you missing school? And what can we do to support you to get you to school? And just as we know that students need food, I loved hearing about food gatherers, and my husband used to be the director at Alpha House, so I'm very familiar with those programs. we need to make sure that we are providing those services for our students. And it's not just when you're at school, how do we help you with the curriculum so you can pass the test? It's building those relationships with the students and the families and making sure that we are truly providing and educating our entire child, every child, the whole child, but sometimes their families, sometimes helping them get the services that they need. If you are in crisis, and too often, and I'll use one of my own daughters as an example. If she is in a mental health crisis, then my grandson is in a mental health crisis. And so if she is struggling on a daily basis to get herself up and get herself to work and do the things that she needs to do to just be a mom, then he is also in a mental health crisis. So whether he's home with her or whether he's coming to school, he's also in a mental health crisis. And so I think that the funding is needed, the personnel are needed, because it's a systemic problem and we need the training. One of the things that we don't do enough training in my opinion, is trauma-informed teaching, trauma-informed, because so many of our kids are coming with that to the schools. So I would say it's money, it's people, it's training.
Thank you.
Yep, I would say like money, but also money in, like, often money is given, but it's so structured in how that money's given that it makes it really hard to do some of the things that the people that are on the inside know that that need to happen. So I understand there's checks and balances and that needs to happen. But if you're not there living it every day and you're saying, well, I'll give the money for this, but you don't know what the money really needs to happen. I mean, Ipsy doesn't turn away money, but often the money that's given to our school system is really, it has to go for really specific things, and it doesn't necessarily help in the ways that we think it would help. My thinking around this was that we really need robust centers of before, during, and after school, which Ypsilanti Community Schools tries to do, but transportation is a huge barrier. So often the children who can access those things on a daily basis, like we do the transportation for Grizzly, we're going to handle that in the summer, but like we have morning programs, but morning programs, we can't transport all of that, or at least with the funding we have right now, we can't. So if somebody's having a hard time, and often that is the case, if your parent's in crisis, you're going to be in crisis, and even some of the relatives that are around your family in crisis. So we'll have grandmas trying to help, but the grandmas are limited in what they can do because they're trying to help. So it's a full spectrum of families, but so we'll offer something, but often the children who can come are people who have the ability to have their parent drive them to that program. And so when students feel this connection to things, it matters. They're going to be more likely to be there. Like a lot of the students, like anything that they love, like athletics, all these things that a lot of families who maybe that have more resources are able to have their children go do these other things. Everybody doesn't have that situation. And those are the things that can really connect you to something. When I was in middle school, some of my best students were the athletes who had coaching team experiences over time. Why? Because they knew if they were coached, they would get better at something. So when you look at the teacher being your coach in something, I would have eighth grade guys saying, listen to her. She knows what she's talking about, because they knew from a coaching experience. But if you don't have the opportunity to experience those team environments where you're going to get better, being coached by something you love, where you could transfer that idea to a teacher who can coach you in learning, where we could offer that. We could offer that if we had the ability to do that after school and even have young children involved in things. But transportation is a big barrier, especially when many of the neighborhood schools are not there. When you were at a neighborhood school and you went to the school, you could walk or you could go back. Students can't do that. I think the school that I'm in right now, most of the students are bused to that school. There's a few walkers, but not a lot, not enough to make it so that we can offer something after school and they can go home. So if we can't do that, we can't go back to that model. We need the resources for transportation to help with that. And then I also think we need more specific planning around if we live in a digital society. So there's a lot of ways that that can help. I'm not a big advocate of students just having a laptop and they're going to be able to learn everything. That's not what I've found to be helpful. But if it is a tool that can help, especially if families understand, if you're not here or you can't be here, here are some things that you could do that day, and real specific with the ability for families to know how to double check. Because sometimes the students are going to tell their families they're done and they're not done like they do me, but I know how to go in and check it. So I think we need to use those tools in ways that could also help this, but it doesn't replace it. I'm not advocating for that to be it. But if you can't be there, like I had one student who had to go, their family had to travel to another state to take care of a relative because that relative who was caring for that elderly parent needed to be gone for a while. So they traveled for about 3 weeks. What we did, they didn't want to unenroll. We knew they're coming back. But then what we did is that we used the laptop in a way that said, okay, here's some of the work. Here's how you're going to engage with us. Here's how you can connect with me in that 3-week time period when you're not here. That way that wasn't a complete loss.
I'm going to go a little bit different here because I want you to hear what the teachers are talking about, because these are the stories that I get every single day. These teachers go above and beyond all of the time. And these stories about the chronic absenteeism are really not about the children. These are about adult situations. And our teachers, and these teachers and all the teachers that we're working with are doing everything that they possibly can to ensure that our children get exceptional education. And we look at all these models around other countries. I went to Finland, Uvalde, Ghana, and these communities, the educators educate. They do what they went to school to do. I went to Finland and in Uvalde, they go to school for half a day, 12 to 4, and their children, their scholars, their scores are better than ours. And the teachers educate. They're expert about educating. They're not doing all the wraparound services and social work and all these things. And the community are partners. You guys are here being partners with us. And they make sure that the adults work with us. They don't walk the students to school. They don't do the busing and all these things. We've got to figure out a way to value education, to put money into education. We've got to do the adult thing and figure out how to make sure children get to school. I mean, I just got to be bottom line. We've got to do the right thing and be the adults and get the students to school to help the adults with it's adult mental health issues. Adults closing doors on adults, adults yelling at my community liaisons, adults. I mean, let's just be real. Because we've got to be the adults and make sure the adults handle the adults. Because what you all do every day, I got to keep applauding you because you figure out a way to get the computers, the stories you just heard. That's what my job is to help you all. And I can keep going to the countries and figure it out, but you can do the research and hear what Naomi says every time. They are not doing these things that these teachers do. These teachers, they are worn out. Yesterday when they left out, it was amazing. But the stories they kept, it was the end of the day and they were still telling me these stories. And they're still trying to figure it out for Grizzly Learning Camp. And we still are going to be in the same circular thing because when you ask me what it is, it's an adult issue. is our scholars are amazing. Ann Arbor, Ypsi, all over this county. And so we've got to figure out the adult thing, because we're going to still, once they get in, we can do these engaging things, the CTE, the things that make it engaging to scholars, the real life application, the athletics. Once they get there, we can make the engaging work, we can make it rigorous, we can do those things. And that's what we ought to do. And yes, we can deal with the mental health concerns that they have had to deal with regarding the trauma. But that's what our teachers need to do what they are equipped to do, is to teach. And that's the real issue. They need to teach. They don't need to be the social workers. They need to teach. And we let us as the community deal with the adults and those types of things.
I'm glad you went there. That what needed to be said. School-based efforts are necessary, but not sufficient to decrease chronic absenteeism. That's the punchline of one of the research articles that came out from the Detroit area a couple years ago. I think I want to point out that this work is, and thinking about absenteeism is more like an ecological system where there are a lot of different things we have to be attending to. So there are things our schools can be doing, and there are resources we need for sure. And you heard some of those. Doing everything we can to have an engaging, supportive, really positive school climate, inclusive schools. Those are some of the things you hear, these amazing teachers. Yep. And I know you'll be able to talk more about that. There's also school or student level things going on. Their own individual disposition towards school, their physical and mental health, their cognitive and social development. So there are things we can do to help individual students with things that they might need. We have the family level challenges. One example is families that change residences during the school year are 4 more times likely to be have the kids be chronically absent. So for our families who are moving from one apartment or home to another, or are homeless, it multiplies that impact. And then at the community level, there's a whole bunch of correlations with absence. And I'm going to give you an example. Our high crime census tracts have statistically significant higher absence rates if you live in one of those census tracts. So understanding that this is something where we have to, as a community, we have to work on things like stable housing. We have to work on affordable housing. We have to work on policies that provide relief for short-term hardship. We need to reduce the structural and environmental inequities. Those things are the community needs to be working on, while the schools are working on the things that they have within their control. The two have to go together. This is more like an ecological system. This is not the fault of any one family, one kid, one school system, one teacher. It's all of us together.
Thank you. I actually have a few more questions, but I want to leave time for audience questions. So I'm going to open the floor now to questions from you. And again, keep the questions very tight. We don't have that much time. I want to first ask, is there anyone here who's a school board trustee who has a question? No. Sir.
Two questions for you. First, how has this rate of not attending affected graduation rates, high school graduation? And secondly, what has the impact of homeschooling been, in your opinion, on the rate of attendance? How has that impacted? I happen to know a lot of people who homeschool. How has that affected the rate of attendance in the schools and then graduation rates?
Thank you.
That's an interesting question because our graduation rates are better than they've ever been. but our number of students attending Washtenaw County schools has dropped by about 4,000 students during the pandemic. And they haven't all come back.
So the graduation rates of the people who attend are different than our cohorts. So when you look on my school data, so for like the number of students who actually attended Ypsilanti Community Schools, graduation rate was 100%, but our cohort rate is like at 82%. So you'll see the difference of that. The attendance rate is impacted by that cohort rate.
So does 82% mean that that 18% of eligible students did not graduate from high school?
Yeah, that cohort. Yep, that's that.
I just want to explain what she meant by cohort. If you start in 9th grade at Ypsilanti Community Schools at the high school program, let's just say the AC Tech High School, and let's say halfway through 9th grade, you leave, and now you're going to Pioneer High School. That student has left Ypsi and is now in some other school. They could leave the high school and go to another school in the same district. But if you follow that cohort, and our graduation rates follow the cohort, so they could be moving around from school to school to school, and we're just tracking whether they eventually graduated. Versus the kids who are with us today in senior year, did they graduate?
There was a second wing to that question. So if you have any comments about homeschooling and how that has any effect on absenteeism?
If you're to be homeschool, you are making a conscious decision to homeschool. So you would not fall on our truancy list. So we have an absenteeism protocol in Washtenaw County where if you miss a certain number of days, like in September, we're going to be following up. So the district has some responsibilities, and when it gets to a chronic absenteeism rate, then the county gets involved with our truancy officer. If you are absent for like 3 or 4 weeks and it looks like you're not coming back, and the family's like, well, we're just homeschooling, then they go off the books for they're unenrolled from the district, and now they're homeschooling. And homeschooling is not tracked. So we don't have good numbers on who's just saying they're homeschooling versus they have a rigorous homeschooling plan, and who's just homeschooling so they don't have to go to school to avoid being absent. So I don't know if those two things you can link very easily with the data systems we have. So I'm not sure if that's the direction you were going with your question. Yeah. We just started having better tracking on private school students, so there's a lot of interesting data there as well.
Thank you. Other questions? Sir.
So I just wanted to provide clarification on my initial comment I made earlier about it getting worse. Basically, from my position, the data that I see shows that the numbers that you're highlighting today are only going to get worse as we move forward. Part of that reason is because back in 2015, public schools in general have become more of a minority majority. And in time, those numbers are going to grow. They are growing. We started out about 50% back in 2015, 2016. We're looking at 60% now. And those numbers are going to grow to 75% in the next, 5 to 8 years?
Are you talking about Washtenaw County alone? Or are you talking about Michigan? What's the base that you're using?
I'm using basically national numbers, but they're also part of the community here in Washtenaw. So when I say it's going to get worse, when you have communities, you have households where you have these problems, they're not going to go away. And the issue is what you've mentioned today, Naomi, about the 31%. All that means is that's going to compound, because now you have 31% of students who may graduate or may not graduate, but they themselves are going to become parents. And when they become parents, they're basically going to transfer over that behavior to those 2 or 3 children that they may have, and it'll grow. So
Could you pose a question?
yeah, so my question to you, and that's just kind of a clarification of the comment I wanted to make, but what I really want to ask is, this year, 2025, is the biggest high school class of all of the United States. I believe there's the largest high school class. It's projected that those numbers going forward up and through 2041 are going to decline. My daughter's class, she graduates in next year. Her class is dropping and so forth. I see that as kind of a bigger picture, but Washtenaw County is a microcosm of that. And I'm seeing those numbers also impacting local school districts here in this area. What are you doing to prepare for that decline in student bodies and students, especially now that you're running into these truancy problems? From a budget standpoint and also from a school solvency, financial solvency standpoint.
Are you referencing like lower birth rates when you say declining?
Well, yeah, well, the situation began in 2008 during the financial crisis that happened. Fewer and fewer people were having less children. So you're running into this. You're gonna have smaller
Right,
classes.
right. So what he's saying, for those who can't hear him, he was pointing to the birth rate information that we're having smaller and smaller families, less students. And if we compound it with what you're suggesting around the 31% of students who are not showing up right now, we're going to have a higher rate of folks who are not graduating. They're going to perpetuate the cycle, and that will compound it as well. And how are we preparing for that? We definitely pay a lot of attention, the superintendents, on the birth rates and enrollment and projected enrollment numbers. We are often projecting in the 5 and 10 year range what it looks like is happening. We do our staffing based on those projections. And the way funding is set up right now, we are funded on a per pupil basis. So we get funding based on the number of students we have. If we lose 100 students, at $10,000 a student, that's a tremendous amount of money. But we also compensate for that by then adjusting our staffing, adjusting our school programs. In some cases, we might see programs, and you can highlight like the special programs that districts might be creating that draw some students from the private, charter, parochial, or homeschooling students back into the system. So there's quite a few in those spaces. And then we just get leaner in terms of how we structure. We just right size as we need to adjust to the number of students. I am going to say something a little more optimistic, however, because I can't let this go. Michigan is an amazing place to live. It is an amazing place to live. Freshwater, amazing. And I also think at the same time as we have declining birth rates, we're going to see an increase in people moving to Michigan in the next 10 years. That's my belief, and I think we're going to fight hard as a state to make it happen.
Cheryl. One second.
The districts do not have control of their education, their funding anymore. Proposal A took that away from the districts, but Proposal A tried to help get equal amounts of money to everyone, so every kid got some sort of better education than what they were getting, that they weren't getting in those districts that couldn't fund schools like where I taught for 43 years in Ann Arbor. I remember back then, Ann Arbor controlled the whole school budget. We only got 1% from the state, and that was for transportation. We did 99%, so we could hold a millage anytime we needed money, and we got money. So we could do these wraparound programs and all these other things. But when Proposal A kicked in, Ann Arbor started losing money to help the other districts. So what you're saying, when you say teachers need to teach, well, the state controls the schools now. They determine how much money we are going to get, and they determine how much they're going to cut from you. So I wish Jeff was still here so he could still talk about their proposal A part coming into play. Because if the Republicans are saying taking all the money now and put it in one pot and then try to do these things, that's what proposal A was supposed to be doing. So now, where are these cuts? Now you're going to take more money. You're going to dilute the money even more now. So we need our state people here to hear what you guys were saying, because they're the ones in control of how much money we get.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that.
I want to point out a couple things about Proposal A. And I think when I heard Senator Irwin talk, he just said it's very complicated and very difficult to change. But I want to point out something between Ann Arbor, and I'm going to use Willow Run as the example. Ann Arbor can tax themselves at a rate, let's just even say they add 1 mil or 2 mil of tax to the Ann Arbor school district. The amount they can bring in, because the value of the homes is so high, is a lot. Another district like Willow Run, at the same time, when they passed millages or bonds, the amount they could bring in, not just because they were a smaller district, but because the value of the homes in their district were lower, the amount they could bring in was much less. And when we brought in, when Proposal A happened at that time, Ann Arbor had tremendous amount of money. They were out of scale with everyone in the state, pretty much, almost all. And we would watch this and say, there is a piece here where we do have a community with a lot of money and they value education and they're able to do everything they want to do. And literally 2 miles away, you could have another district that was really poor and they tax themselves twice or 3 times as much and still struggled to maintain a fraction of the services Ann Arbor could provide. So there is a place, if we care about all kids in this state, where we have to say to ourselves, how are we going to balance this so we can do both, right? And the one part I appreciate about Proposal A, and I'm going to say this from the county level, we can go for a millage at the county level for special education, for example, which we did last year, and that would support all the districts. And we would be able to distribute and support based on the need of every district. And fortunately for Washtenaw County, we value education. We are able to do that for all of our districts. And there are other ways, if we wanted to, the community could say, we want to come together as Washtenaw County and continue to tax ourselves on behalf of the schools. You could choose to do that. So there's still opportunities for that. I do think the state dollars are way low for what were promised in 1996, way low. It should be probably, what, $2 billion higher at this point.
Thank you. I think there was one question at the back of the room.
Hello. So I graduated 2 days ago. Yay. Which was, it was a fun time, I guess. But I had a question about the school's ability. Like this is a very like niche, I guess, case. But like every day, like I'd go to these classes, and there are peers who walk in and then just walk out because they don't want to be there. Specifically in my APES classes happen a lot. Like more than half the class typically just did not show up, even though they were at school. They just went to some other part of the building on this at Pioneer, because absences aren't punished at Pioneer. There's actually there's other than your grade, there's no downside for students to skip or to not show up at Pioneer specifically. Yeah, there's no disciplinary action. And I wanted to hear what you guys like. Do you have suggestions? Do you think that's a good idea to have no disciplinary action? Or should teachers be able to, I don't know, enforce somehow more, enforce that their students should actually attend class?
Thank you. No Pioneer teachers here, by the way.
I'm a Pioneer parent, so I understand.
So I'm going to out my grandson here who goes to Huron, who that's one of his chronic issues is, wait a minute, we sent you to school. Why are we getting this phone call at 6 p.m. saying that you didn't go to whatever hour? And so I think one of the things that happens when we talk about teachers just teaching and having that ability to do, I think one of the things that I definitely have experienced are students not necessarily attending the classes when they get to school. And I don't know that having a way to provide consequences to students that don't attend class is necessarily the way to do that. I'm not sure who would do that. I know that when we talk about things like students not having cell phones in classrooms, right? That it's important that students not have cell phones, and yet, I remember very clearly an example of a teacher attempting to take a cell phone and was attacked by that student. So I think for there are a lot of reasons why teachers don't specifically address, that students aren't coming to class. As far as administration, I would defer to the superintendent on the panel about, an administrative response to that. But I know from the teaching lens, I know a lot of the teachers in Ann Arbor in particular don't want to get into an argument with a student about where that student was on a day-to-day basis.
I mean, the one thing I'd add is just that I think that it's so hard because you don't want to be punitive, and I wouldn't advocate for that, but somehow accountability is become maybe synonymous with punitive. I'm not sure, because I think there's a place for accountability, and you don't want to be punitive with that. But I think that's kind of where there's kind of this area in the middle where people don't want to be punitive in any way, shape, or form. Like if the family's not coming to school, like you don't want to be punitive. How can we help you? And if you're not going to class and you're not staying in class and you belong in class, I mean, you don't want to suspend, you don't want to do those types of things, but like figuring out what that balance is, because when you are, like I'm trying to think of the little boxes they have where like leniency isn't really caring about people either. So high accountability with high support is, I'm looking at that little box, right? And like the corner you end up in, like, I think that's what happens. We get in these complex problems and people are like, oh, I don't want to do it. I'm going to back away because I don't want to be harsh, or the things that sometimes you think of accountability, but backing away and not knowing what to do and doing nothing is really almost, it's the same as being super punitive and super harsh. So I don't know what that looks like. I know I would call the warm demander as a teacher, I think was a term they used to use, that like, we are going to do this. Like I'll tell students, we are going to do this. Like maybe it's going to take a little while, but we are going to do this, because loving them was making sure that they were participating in what they needed to do. But again, you got to have a really good relationship with parents. You got a really good relationship with children. You've got to have really that to be able to do that. But for me, I mean, I always thought of my students as my child, and what would I want somebody to do with my child? And it wasn't okay to not be where you were supposed to be for my child. So anyway.
We hope to have a lot of project-based assignments, and if you're missing your project, you're missing points. And so I'm hoping that, and I'm going to be checking on this, that at IPSI, that if you're missing your project, you're missing points, and that those points, that your peers are holding you to it. So then you're saying, hey, you're missing in this rubric your points, and so that you're not giving the other person points, and you're holding that person to it. So in that project-based assignments, you and your team, you're saying you can't leave out because in these project-based pieces. And that's where we're talking about, even with this absence piece, if you're doing projects and in these projects you're holding each other and needing people to be there, that's a part of why you want to be in class. It's a part of you doing these things, because that's the real world pieces and the scenarios. And one of the reasons why you need to be in class, want to be in class, and why you're holding each other accountable. And that's part of changing the way we're doing schooling. We're working on it.
Actually, I would like to ask one more question, and we are reaching the end. Would you take questions from the audience? Can you stick around just a couple minutes afternoon? So questions that weren't asked, and that is one effect of the pandemic was to put students more behind. I'll focus here especially on elementary school, so that whereas the average in some places was maybe 1 or 2 years behind, it becomes 1 to 3 years. To what extent does it affect absenteeism when more students are showing up, say for 4th grade, who read at the 2nd grade level, and they're in that class, they're not actually learning that much, and they feel humiliated. And so to what extent is there a need for more, you could say, individuation of instruction to make school more meaningful as a result of this learning loss that resulted from the pandemic? I know this is a strange question to ask with 5 minutes left in the session, but I want to ask if you think that's actually a possibility. This is playing a role.
Because I teach 4th grade. I think so. My group of 4th graders that will be finishing and exiting to 5th grade, they were in kindergarten during the pandemic, and what we're finding, just in terms of academics for students, the struggle for writing is what we're actually, like, they're way ahead in terms of technology and math. You can catch students up with, but we're finding these really huge gaps with handwriting because they were home on computers during the time where they were learning to do that. So I don't know that it's necessarily students coming in and feeling as though they're so behind their peers because they're sort of all in this same bubble together. But I think that, I will speak to, just to touch on a little bit of what you said. I think for some students that are chronically absent, it is really, instruction in my classroom starts the second the students walk in the door. There's not a lapse of, they come in, there's something that's up on the projector for them. These are the materials that you need to get. This is the morning work. It might be a morning math problem to sort of get us ready, to get us engaged. It starts from the moment they come into the classroom. And so when you have students that are absent, that are missing those interactions, students that are late, that are missing those interactions, it can be really challenging to come in and sort of know, wait, where are we? What's everybody doing? We experience that as an adult. You come into a meeting, you arrive late, maybe you're stuck in traffic, and there's a little bit of that, okay, what are we doing? When you're a child coming in and doing that, it's really difficult to know where to pick up. And if you've missed instruction for multiple days, I had a student that for one of our units in math, she literally missed 12 of the 14 lessons. Well, you come in on a day that we're doing an assessment, but you weren't there for anything. And so it does feel a little bit demoralizing for some students. I found that sometimes students don't, and I found this typically for students coming out of the pandemic, of students not necessarily having the resiliency to be able to do that, particularly young students. They haven't developed that yet. So they are not quite sure of what we're doing. They don't know. And I definitely have had students that will give up before they begin because it's just too overwhelming. And so of, breaking things like that into smaller chunks for those students to help them and trying to give those students some one-on-one time to help them begin to feel a little bit more confident. But I'm definitely seeing that. But it's more handwriting that we're experiencing because they weren't in school to learn those. You're not writing on the computer over Zoom.
Thank you. We do have about 2 minutes left in this meeting. So if anyone wants to just chime in briefly.
In addition, as we think about these young students, there's their development academically and writing, which is what a great point. I'm thinking about their social development is also in a different place. Yeah. Yeah. There's an interesting thing happening on multiple levels. And for me, it's leading me to feel like my intuition right now that we're in a pivot point with our education system. And the pivot point that I'm seeing is a lot more attention being paid to students and their identity and sense of purpose in the world, and having the opportunity at school to take those skills they're learning, the reading, the writing, the math, and applying them in a way that matters to them. And so I see us collectively trying to create and need to create more opportunities where we can take that learning and do something with it as part of a legitimate part of their activity at school. So more project-based, place-based, problem-based, real world, helping them see a future for themselves in this world. Having them try things, learn they don't like it, try things, learn they do like it, building it out so it's a coherent, stackable credentials leading to the future, through college for them. And so I think that's a pivot we need to make in Washtenaw County to support these kids coming out of the pandemic, but to also set up our system for the future to be very successful and to really educate the whole child.
On that note, we're going to have to stop. I'm going to thank our panelists for taking the time to speak with us. This is a meeting that could go on all afternoon, but you have other things to do. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Teresa.
Thanks, Eli. Thanks, you guys. My mom was a teacher. My uncle, her big brother, was a teacher and superintendent, and their dad was also a public school teacher and administrator. Totally committed to public education, and as a result of that, I'm totally aware of how difficult these jobs are. So thank you so much for the amount of time that you put in and the love that you put in. It is huge. Thank you. They'll be around, you'll be able to block their exit from the room. I did not do that. That was not me. And we didn't mean like a sound block, but you guys will be able to block their exit from the room, so you'll have a chance to talk to them for a little bit longer. I think we're getting on the screen. Are we getting the QR code for the Signal group? Okay, so you can take a sec and go to the QR code and sign up for one of the Signal groups to stay very closely in touch with with action for the WCDP. All right, we're in a crisis, as you know. It'll come up. And oh, hi everybody online. I was told that the room was empty. Hi. So glad you're here. Anyway, sign up and join us to take steps to save our democracy, which is, as we know, in crisis. Thank you again. Thank you for being here on this gorgeous day. Annie, what do you want?
They're gonna hang out outside. I have somewhere to be at 1, and I need to.
Oh, Annie, by the way, would you please wait outside? I mean, talk outside because Annie has to outside because Annie has to close up the building and she has another engagement. Thank you. Okay. You're welcome.